Hey up viewers and viewers, my name is General Red Strategist and welcome back to Sir You're Being Hunted, episode 397. So we're not far off the big 400, ladies and gentlemen. Back here, of course, on our on our current map. Another podcast style episode for today, ladies and gents. And of course, as I said in the previous episode, Q&A is what we're going to be doing for episode 400 when we get around to that, or at least that's what I'm aiming to do anyway. So as usual, if you have questions, things you want to leave us, do post them down in the comments. Ask me anything at all, anything you want. Of course, if there is anything that I'm not content answering, then, we won't answer it. But I'm not going to preclude anything, so if you want to ask about whatever, then go right ahead, give it a shot and all that. But, like I say, that'll be for episode 400, and I'm hoping to get Phil involved. Oh man, I'm really going to have to push this Q&A actually over. Not just Sir You're Being Hunted, I'll probably make reference to it as well in other videos, just so it's clear, so that way anybody who wants to take part can do so. Because it would be unfortunate if we ended up with a bit of a situation where nobody had really had any kind of questions, and so I ended up having to do something else for episode 400, but yes, well, I'll have to post something on the Facebook and Twitter pages actually. I haven't actually done that yet, so I'll do that in due course. But back here, like I say, in the land of Sir You're Being Hunted, another podcast style episode, and I didn't want to talk about the Q&A, I just wanted to quickly mention that straight off the bat, just to remind people if they're interested and whatever else have you. But something I actually did want to talk about in today's episode, I was just kind of thinking about it recently and watching trailers on YouTube, but I've been on a bit of a nostalgia trip recently, listening to soundtracks from one of my favourite games from my youth, Beyond Good and Evil. Now, I've talked about Beyond Good and Evil before here on Sir You're Being Hunted. Pretty sure, for example, in that Best and Worst video in this series that me and Phil once did here in Sir You're Being Hunted, I'm pretty sure we may have talked about it there, possibly. But I probably have also talked about that game elsewhere as well during Sir You're Being Hunted, and possibly in other series that I've done here on the channel. But to reiterate, Beyond Good and Evil was an Ubisoft game from Michel Ancel, the creator of the Rayman series. It was released in 2003, and now I didn't play it when it was released. I actually played it a couple of years later. I think I first played Beyond Good and Evil in 2006. And it quickly established itself as being one of my favourite games, probably of all time, that I've ever played. And, admittedly, by today's standards, things like the graphics and things might be a bit sort of dated, but, it was a game that was oozing with a lot of charm. And granted, the storyline and the mechanics of it maybe were not, the deepest things you might have ever seen before in a game, and Beyond Good and Evil was only short, it wasn't very long either, but it was one of those games where what it did do, it did very well. It was fairly solid as a game, and what really just helped make it so good was the fact that, like I say, it had a lot of charm to it, particularly in terms of the setting, the environment, the characters, the world in which it took place. Everything was just oozing with personality, and that's probably one of the reasons why back in 2006, when I was sort of getting towards, not quite, but getting towards my sort of latter teenage years, that's probably why it really stood out to me, and I really enjoyed it. Because it was probably actually the first game I'd ever played that I would say really had, honestly, something of an emotional impact on me. Even though, like I say, it was only short. But you know me, I have a bit of a philosophy towards games, which is that sometimes I would rather play something that's short, but which really leaves a good taste, and which is really memorable, rather than playing something that's quite long, but which ends up kind of being really drawn out. That's the thing. Whoa, Jesus. Okay, for some reason, weird little lag spike just then in the game. Hopefully that didn't cut my commentary just then, but I'll reiterate what I was saying, just in case it did. So, I have a philosophy towards games, which is essentially that, I'd sometimes rather play something that's short, but really memorable, than something which is long, but which ends up being, at times, somewhat drawn out. And that's why I really like Beyond Good and Evil, because like I say, it was only a short game, and it was very memorable for what it was. But like I say, I've talked about what it is that I enjoyed about Beyond Good and Evil before, so I'm not going to kind of go too much into that. But let's just say, recently I've been on a bit of a nostalgia trip with Beyond Good and Evil. I've been listening to soundtracks on YouTube, because of course there's plenty of people who've uploaded the soundtrack online and all that, which is great, because, that's one thing Beyond Good and Evil did have really good going for it, which was the soundtrack, of course, apart from all the other stuff that I've mentioned just a moment ago. But I was watching that, and that kind of reminded me that obviously in E3 2017, Beyond Good and Evil 2 had officially really been confirmed, because of course you'd had the trailer for it that was shown then, and Michel Ancel had come out on stage, and it was like a massive nostalgia rush and all that, and it got so much applause when that trailer got shown. And of course that was in 2017, and so far we haven't really had a lot in the way of other news about the game, which is, on the one hand, obviously as a Beyond Good and Evil fan, I would love to learn more about it, but at the same time, there's that kind of tension between wanting to learn more and wanting to just let the devs have the kind of time and space to make sure that what they produce is of a really decent quality. And because that's the thing, when you rewatch the trailers that have been released for Beyond Good and Evil 2, obviously they are taking it in a slightly different direction to the original. Because the thing is, the original Beyond Good and Evil was, I would say, fairly PG. It's generally quite family friendly. There was nothing, too kind of risque or anything like that in it. There was no strong language, no. Obviously the storyline is quite dark when you think about what's actually going on, but then again, there's a lot of stories that are family friendly which are kind of dark in some ways. And but if you watch the Beyond Good and Evil 2 trailers, obviously they're taking it in a bit more of a risque direction, because they've now got lots more in the way of strong language, things like that. And at the end of the day, I don't think that'll necessarily be a bad thing. I know some people in the comments on the trailers are like, oh, they're changing up the style a bit, it's going to be really different, is this really going to be Beyond Good and Evil? Or is this just going to end up being something like Assassin's Creed or GTA in space? And, whilst I sort of do appreciate the concerns, and I myself would be kind of concerned if Ubisoft ended up going down the route of just turning it into Assassin's Creed in space or something like that. At the end of the day, though, I do kind of acknowledge that there has to be some evolution here. Because the thing is, the original Beyond Good and Evil, like I said, was from 2003. So it's coming up to, 20 years old, almost? And so the thing is, the original audience from the first BG&E game, they're going to be getting along in age now. Most of them, I would imagine, are probably around my age or maybe a bit older by now, i.e. getting into their 30s, possibly even beyond that. And so, the audience will have aged, and the thing you've got to remember about the original Beyond Good and Evil is that, although critically speaking it was a success, it got a lot of good reviews at the time, commercially speaking it was not a success. If anything, it was a bit of a flop. It didn't sell very well, probably because the marketing for it wasn't very good. And at the same time, in 2003 you had other big established franchises with new installments being released, like Prince of Persia, stuff like that. And so obviously Ubisoft is going to be reluctant to make the same mistakes that they made in 2003. They're going to want to try and make sure that the new installment Beyond Good and Evil not only appeals to kind of the small audience that they got in 2003, but also to more mainstream audiences in the video game market that there are now. And that, makes perfect sense, because we don't want Beyond Good and Evil 2 being a commercial flop like the original was. So that does mean that there might have to be certain changes to the formula of the original in order to kind of appeal to today's demographics. And if they feel that, it needs to be a bit more edgy, then that might be what they have to do. But that doesn't mean, they can't still create a world or an in-game setting and characters who aren't oozing with charm. Because that's the one thing I will give the trailers. The characters do look interesting. So, if you watch the original E3 2017 trailer, you had like the monkey dude, who you see in the kind of opening shot with the pig dude giving him what appears to be an artifact, but which actually turns out to be a fake. It's actually just chocolate. But yeah, and then of course his kind of comrade, the woman on the bike, and so some of the characters do look pretty awesome, like I say, and they do look like it's going to have that charm, except just with that slight, that edge factor maybe switched up a bit. But like I say, that could be fine. It isn't necessarily a bad thing. But what I do hope is that whatever universe they create, there are probably several things that I would hope that Michel Ancel and the development team for Beyond Good and Evil 2 maybe bear in mind. So, for example, maybe that, like I say, that thing about sometimes a smaller in-game world, which has plenty to do and has a lot going for it, can perhaps be more interesting than a large world where it gets kind of drawn out. And so that made me think, because if you look at the setting of the original Beyond Good and Evil, which is Hillis, it's decently sized, but it's not massive. There's plenty to do, but it's not so big that you'll find yourself eventually wandering around and just finding that eventually you reach a point where you realise all the things that there are available to do on this map are essentially just the same things eventually, and that you end up just repeating yourself a lot. Because that is the one thing I did sometimes find with the Assassin's Creed games. Because with each one it felt like they went for bigger and bigger and bigger settings, Oh god, I just moved my mouse like an idiot. So, there was obviously... let's take, obviously, Assassin's Creed 3, So we'll talk about the Assassin's Creed games that I played just for a moment, but Assassin's Creed 3, that has a fairly big sort of setting, and there's a lot kind of going on in it. Okay, take you out, please. There we go. So, in Assassin's Creed 3, you have the homestead, you have the frontier, you have the various towns and places you go, then you have the sea and maritime environments. Now, admittedly, Assassin's Creed 3 did have, a fair amount of stuff going for it, because apart from the main sort of settings on land, it did also have, obviously, the naval sections, which did help to break up the gameplay a bit and introduce new stuff that was quite fun. And then, of course, you had Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which went for an even bigger map with lots of islands. And obviously that took the naval combat and made it one of its primary mechanics, which was great, But then you got to Assassin's Creed Unity, and obviously now it was back to a completely land-based setting, and after AC4, which had had a mix of land-based and naval-based gameplay, Assassin's Creed Unity again went for a really big setting, namely late 18th century revolutionary era Paris. But the problem I sometimes started to have with Unity was that the maps, or rather the map, it was a big map, but because there was no longer any naval combat, that meant that by comparison to previous Assassin's Creed games, it felt like there was less and less stuff to actually do. So, of course, eventually, the stuff that you are actually doing starts to feel kind of repetitive after a while. And then, of course, you got Syndicate, which is set in Victorian London in the 1860s, which, great setting and all that, fantastic. But the only issue with it was, again, that after a while the gameplay gets very repetitive. Because the thing about Syndicate is the map is divided into all kinds of boroughs, and you have to go and liberate each one. But the way you liberate each one, essentially, you have to do it bit by bit, mission by mission. And essentially, the borough liberation missions are all kind of, they're essentially kind of copy-paste of the same things. One way you have to assassinate certain targets, one way you have to take down the temple flags and replace them with your own, things like this. And it does get samey after a while. And I think that's maybe the problem with some of those Assassin's Creed games, is that Ubisoft wanted to create these massive, really visually stunning maps, and don't get me wrong, they are visually stunning, but the problem is that from a gameplay point of view, eventually things can get repetitive and maybe a bit tedious in that regard. So that's possibly something that the devs of Beyond Good and Evil 2 need to bear in mind. It would be good, to obviously set out a really interesting, colourful setting, but, there is such a thing, I think, as being too big, and so that's something perhaps just for them to watch out for, and to maybe hide plenty of stuff throughout that world, and put plenty of different things in it which add to a bit of variation in the gameplay, so that way it just keeps things freshened up and a bit lively and things like that. Yeah. But something else I did hear about Beyond Good and Evil 2, though, And at first I wasn't sure what to think about this, but I saw this basically just on the Beyond Good and Evil 2 Wikipedia page. But apparently you are going to need a constant internet connection in order to play it. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking here, and it's what some of you may be thinking is probably what I was thinking as well when I first read this. Because here's the thing, I don't play a lot of multiplayer games. I am very much a single player kind of guy, and the thought that I would have to have a constant internet connection just to play a single player game does make me think, why? Why would I need that? So I think the thing is that Ubisoft is potentially planning that it'll be one of those games where, because it's connected, things that maybe other players do in their games could have an effect on yours. So I think kind of like Death Stranding, for example, where, granted, you don't need an internet connection to play Death Stranding, but it certainly helps if you do have one, because that way you can sort of connect via Steam to basically to other players' gameplay, and thus it affects your own, because things like player-made structures and things like that will show up in your world. It's not multiplayer, that is. It's not like other players can literally appear in your world and you can interact with them. That's not how it works. In essence, it's so let's say for example in Death Stranding I build a certain structure because I have an internet connection. Then of course when I quit out the game, it synchronises on Steam. That structure can then potentially show up in other people's games in order to help them. And of course, other players can then leave likes on my structure, which eventually helps my character level up and things like that. So it's not multiplayer, but there's that kind of, how would you describe it? Sort of interplayer interactivity, to put it that way. So that kind of comes across, and I don't know exactly what the plan is, internet connection wise, with Beyond Good and Evil 2. Why it is that Ubisoft is saying you will need a constant internet connection in order to play it. My guess is maybe they're going for something akin to Death Stranding, where perhaps players won't necessarily be able to access each other's games, but they might be able to do certain things in their own game that potentially has an effect on other people's games. So as another example, I have heard, for example, something that might serve as a good analogy to this might also be Subnautica. So I do know a little bit about Subnautica, because obviously I played it before, not just here on the channel in my odd one-off video on it, but also back when it was still in development, I did play it in my own time a bit. And as it was updated, one of the things that you can apparently do in Subnautica is leave a time capsule, which has the potential to show up in someone else's game. So it's that kind of interconnectivity between people's games. It's not multiplayer, but you can sort of affect each other's gameplay, in essence. So I'm wondering if that's what the aim is here with Beyond Good and Evil 2, potentially. But what I would hope is that Ubisoft maybe includes an option in Beyond Good and Evil 2 for those of us who maybe are not so interested in that, to be able to play the game offline. Because I feel like there's no reason for them not to include an offline option, just for the sake of making sure that there's choice in there. Because the thing is, there's only one other game I've ever played in my life which required a constant internet connection at all times, and that game was Command & Conquer 4. I can't remember what the subtitle was. It was like Tiberium Twilight or something. Was it Tiberium Twilight? I can't even remember. But essentially it was Command & Conquer 4. And that game needed a constant internet connection, and let's just say that was not a good game. It wasn't. It was kind of annoying, in fact, because literally it needed an internet connection. You could not actually even launch the game if you were not connected to the internet. And that was just bad. It was really poor, let's put it that way. But yeah, so Ubisoft, don't make Beyond Good and Evil 2 like that. Make sure that it's set up so that if people want to play it offline, they can do. Just give them that choice. And that way, everything should hopefully be okay. Right, let me just throw a bottle and try and distract these buggers. Send them off in that direction, in fact. Okay. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on Beyond Good and Evil, ladies and gents. Oh, why are you stood there? What are you doing? Why can't you just bugger off and go search for the bottle like your friend did? Or is he stuck? I think he might be stuck, actually, now that I think about it. Get him. Good lord. There we go, got them two at least. But in the meantime, of course, you know, on this topic of conversation, if anyone wants to chime in and give their 2 cents, any other people out there looking forward to Beyond Good and Evil 2 potentially, I imagine there will be, surely. What are your thoughts on the path of development so far? Man, I think at some point I'm going to go back and rewatch the trailers for Beyond Good and Evil 2 and just see, you know, rewatch them basically. Because I think the idea behind it is you're going to have like a space pirate crew in it, and it's possible that you might be able to create your own character, something like that. I think, from what I've heard, that might be the case of what Ubisoft is going for with it, so it should sound like it... I mean, you know, if they get it right, it sounds like it should be a really interesting game. But like I say, you know, as a fan of the traditional, the old Beyond Good and Evil, I just really do hope and pray that they don't screw it up, because it'll be really disappointing after all these years if Beyond Good and Evil 2 comes out and it just doesn't do very well. It'll be so kind of crushing in a way, to put it that way. Okay, well, you know what, we've been recording for a good amount of time there, so I think probably this will be the time to wrap up here. In which case, I'll get ourselves back to the jetty and save the game, off camera if need be. In the meantime, of course, hope you enjoyed that, and hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble about Beyond Good and Evil, the franchise, and hope you'll join me for episode 398 when I get around to doing that. In the meantime, Facebook and Twitter links down below, along with the link to my propagandist channel for anyone interested. If you enjoyed, don't forget, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you in the next part, everybody. Goodbye, all. Okay, ooh. Watch out for the little charge attack. There's one down. Okay, he's flying off over there. Is it just the 2 of them? I doubt it. God, no. Oh, there's another one behind. Okay. Okay, go this way. Oh god. Yeah, it's bad. Time not to get beaten up, because these guys are a bit asshole-ish. Seem to recall from bloody hell. Try not to get Grom in the middle there, please. Just keep going round. Go. Watch out for the swoop of God. Where do you come from? Go. Oh, we are going to fucking run out of bloody stuff at this rate.